When it really hit me, I looked over and there was this mother bawling.
There have been some really terrifying wildfires in the history of the United States. Fires that swept through places and changed everything. Fires that destroyed countless lives. From fire that went on for years to the deadliest ones. Let's talk about 10 of the worst ones and see what happened, going deeper into each story to really understand what happened. First up, we have the Pigo Fire. This happened way back on October the 8th, 1871. Think about that time. No cars, no planes, just horses and trains. Well, this fire hit a town called Pigo in Wisconsin, a place known for its lumber mills at the time. People think a lot about the Great Chicago Fire from that same day, but this one was actually much worse in terms of lives lost, almost like it got forgotten in the shadow of the Chicago tragedy. No one knows for sure exactly what started it, but the area was experiencing a really dry summer and fall. There was lots of leftover branches and sawdust from the lumber industry just lying around, perfect kindling. Maybe some sparks from a train chugged along the tracks, or perhaps farmers clearing land with fire that just got out of control in the strong winds, and it led to the disaster that followed. The fire moved super fast, much faster than anyone could have imagined. Witnesses described a terrifying wall of flames roaring through the town. It created its own weather, with fire tornadoes spinning through the air. And it burned down the whole town of Pigo and even jumped across Green Bay, which is quite a distance. And more than 1,200 people died. Of course, many more people were hurt, suffering terrible burns and injuries, and everyone who survived lost everything they owned. Estimates say the damage was worth about $169 million in today's money. Imagine the desperation of people trying to escape. It was so bad that some even sought refuge in the Pigo River, hoping the water would save them from the intense heat and flames. Sadly for some, it wasn't enough. All that burning wood, those homes, those businesses, also put a huge amount of carbon dioxide into the air. Scientists think it was around 2.7 million tons. Now, moving on to another disaster, let's talk about the Cloquet Fire. This one happened on October the 12th, 1918, also in the state of Minnesota. World War I was still going on then, and people had other serious things on their minds, but this fire was a huge tragedy right here at home. Like the Pigo Fire, this one probably started from sparks, maybe from a passing train, and its hot embers landing in a dry bush, or from people maybe carelessly burning trash when the conditions were just far too dangerous. The weather played a huge role, too. It was unusually hot and incredibly windy that day, which made the fire spread like crazy through the dense pine forest and the small towns and farming communities around Cloquet. It wasn't just one town this time. Several communities like Moose Lake and Kettle River were also hit incredibly hard. People described a terrifying orange sky and the sound of the fire roaring like a freight train. Around 453 people lost their lives in this fire. Again, many more were hurt, suffering burns and smoke inhalation, and were left with absolutely nothing. The fire didn't discriminate. It destroyed homes, farms, lumber mills, and businesses, causing about $108 million in damage in today's money. The loss of the timber industry in that area was a massive blow. All that burned forests and homes and the businesses, it released a lot of CO2 into the air, estimated to be around 1.6 million tons. Let's jump across the country now to see what happened out west. The Great Fire of 1910 is next on our list. This one wasn't just in one town or even in one state. It roared through vast stretches of northern Idaho, western Montana, and even parts of eastern Washington in late August of 1910. This was a really massive fire, fueled by a long, incredibly dry summer that year, and the forests were like tinderboxes, and then hit by fierce winds. It's thought that countless small fires, many started by lightning strikes during summer thunderstorms, and possibly some carelessness from human activity may have started the fires, all eventually joined together to become this giant, unstoppable monster fire. The fire burned over 3 million acres. To conceptualize this in terms of numbers, well, it's close to the size of the state of Connecticut. And the worst part was that the technology they had back then was of no use to fight this beast, mostly just axes, shovels, and sheer manpower. While the number of direct deaths wasn't as high as the previous fires, with around 87 people dying, the impact and the scale were absolutely enormous. Many of those who died were brave firefighters, including a significant number of newly recruited Forest Service employees, trying to valiantly stop the seemingly endless flames. The damage to the pristine forests and scattered property was immense, estimated at around $1 billion in today's dollars. Think of all the ancient trees gone in an instant, the countless animals that perished, the complete devastation of ecosystems. And of course, all that burning released a truly massive amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, possibly as much as 18 million tons. The smoke from this fire was so thick it reportedly turned day into night in cities hundreds of miles away. And the fire really brought home the immense and terrifying power of nature and how incredibly difficult it is to fight something so vast and relentless. Staying out west, we need to talk about the Tillamook Burn. This wasn't a single event happening in just one day, but a series of devastating forest fires that repeatedly ravaged the same area in Oregon. The first big one happened in August of 1933. Like so many times before, incredibly dry conditions after a long, hot summer, combined with strong winds, played a huge part in turning a small spark into a catastrophe. The cause is thought to have been from logging operations. Perhaps some machinery sparked against a rock, or a discarded cigarette ignited the dry underbrush and logging debris left behind. Well, the fire raged through the Tillamook State Forest, burning almost 240,000 acres. Imagine a landscape transformed into charred wasteland in a matter of days. Well, thankfully fewer people died directly in this particular fire. Just a couple of deaths were reported, but the economic damage, well, it was huge and long-lasting. The loss of such a vast amount of valuable timber was devastating to the local economy, costing around $725 million in today's money. The fire also drastically changed the landscape for decades, leaving behind a burn that was visible for miles. Then, incredibly and tragically, the same area burned again in 1939, 1945, and in 1951. Each time it was a similar story: bone-dry conditions after hot summers, and a spark somehow ignited the dry fuel. Over the series of these burns, more than 355,000 acres were charred and left barren. The CO2 released from just the first big burn in 1933 is estimated to be around 3.5 million tons, and considering the subsequent burns, the total emissions were staggering. Now, as we consider the Tillamook Burn, with its repeated devastation of the same area, it's easy to see these are isolated tragedies. Unfortunate circumstances colliding, it seems. But what if these fires aren't just random events? Imagine for a moment that these catastrophic fires, spanning over a century, have left an imprint not just on the land, but on something more, something akin to a fire memory within the very fabric of these places. Think about it. The land scorched, the deep changes in the soil and vegetation, even the very air experiencing these intense infernos. Some theories, pushing the boundaries of science, suggest that such massive energetic events could potentially leave a kind of residual charge or predisposition in the environment itself, subtly influencing weather patterns or increasing the likelihood of future ignition in the same regions. It's a controversial idea, to be sure, but as we move forward, consider this. Are we simply chronicling a series of unfortunate events, Or are we witnessing the echoes of the past traumas manifesting in fiery new forms? Moving on to modern times, let's look at the Oakland Hills firestorm in California. This happened on October the 20th, 1991. Well, this was a shockingly fast-moving fire that hit a very densely populated urban area. And it was a terrifying example of the wildland-urban interface. It started small in a private property near Caldecott Tunnel, maybe from a smoldering ember from a grass fire that had been put out the day before, but strong gusty winds and extremely dry conditions, typical of the Diablo winds in that area, turned it into a monster in just a matter of hours. The fire ripped through the Oakland and Berkeley Hills, destroying entire neighborhoods in what felt like an instant. What made this fire particularly devastating was that it happened in a place with lots of houses built close together, many with highly flammable wooden roofs and surrounded by dry vegetation which acted like ladders for the flames, allowing them to jump from house to house. Tragically, 25 people lost their lives in this fire, and thousands more were left homeless, their lives turned upside down in a matter of hours. The destruction was unbelievable. Over 3,000 homes were completely destroyed, causing around $3.7 billion in damage in today's money. Imagine the sheer panic and chaos as people tried to evacuate with little warning, the sky filled with smoke and burning embers raining all around. The fire burned relatively quickly over a small area compared to some of the massive forest fires we talked about earlier, but the direct impact on people's lives was absolutely immense and deeply traumatic. The CO2 emissions are estimated to be around 0.14 million tons, lower than the huge forest fires, but still a significant amount for a fire of its size and intensity. Next up is the Hmon Fire in Colorado, which started on June 8, 2002. This fire stands out because it was started by a person. A U.S. Forest Service employee intentionally set the fire, a shocking act of arson. This makes it fundamentally different from the accidental or natural causes of some of the other fires on this list, adding a layer of anger and betrayal to the tragedy. The Hmon Fire burned over 138,000 acres in the Pike National Forest, a beautifully and ecologically important area. While thankfully no one died directly in the fire, it caused very significant damage to both the environment and private property. Hundreds of homes and other structures, vacation cabins and outbuildings, were tragically destroyed, costing around $44 million in damages at the time. And the emotional cost for those who lost their homes was immeasurable. The fire also had a really big impact on the watershed, the area that collects water, affecting the water quality for the city of Denver, a consequence that lasted for years. The estimated CO2 emissions from this fire are around 2.1 million tons. It's a stark and unsettling reminder that human actions, even intentional and malicious ones, can have incredibly devastating and long-lasting consequences when it comes to wildfires and the environment. Let's travel south now to Texas and look at the Bastrop County Complex Fire. This happened in September of 2011. Texas was suffering from a really severe drought at the time, making all the vegetation incredibly dry and easy to ignite. Then strong winds from the remnants of Tropical Storm Lee swept through the area, helping to spread the fire with frightening speed. The fire burned over 34,000 acres, mostly in and around the beloved Bastrop State Park, an area known for its unique loblolly pine forest, some of the oldest in the state. Sadly, 2 people tragically lost their lives in this fire, and many, many more homes were destroyed, nearly 1,700 of them, leaving countless families displaced and heartbroken. The estimated property damage was around $325 million. This fire was particularly devastating because it burned through the ancient loblolly pine forest, a truly irreplaceable loss for the area's ecology and a landscape feature that had been there for hundreds of years. The estimated CO2 emissions from the Bastop Fire are around 0.5 million tons. Now we go back to California for an incredibly devastating fire, the Camp Fire. This fire happened in November of 2018 and is sadly one of the deadliest and most destructive wildfires in California's recorded history. The fire started on November the 8th and spread with terrifying speed due to the extremely strong winds and vegetation that was incredibly dry after a long, hot summer. The cause was determined to be faulty and aging equipment owned by a major power company, highlighting the risks of neglecting infrastructure. The Camp Fire ripped through the town of Paradise, practically and tragically wiping it off the map. It happened so quickly that many residents had little to no warning, leading to horrific scenes of people trying to escape through walls of flames. Tragically, 85 people lost their lives in this fire, and thousands upon thousands of homes and businesses were completely destroyed. Over 18,000 structures in total, an almost unimaginable level of destruction. The damage was estimated to be around a staggering $16.5 billion, making it not only one of the deadliest but also one of the costliest fires ever in the U.S. The sheer speed and the overwhelming intensity of this fire were shocking to everyone, and the estimated CO2 emissions from the Camp Fire are around 7.7 million tons. Let's look at another recent and massive fire, the August Complex Fire in California from the summer of 2020. This wasn't just a single fire burning in one location, but rather a cluster of many different wildfires that ignited across Northern California in mid-August of 2020 and eventually merged together, becoming the single largest wildfire in California's recorded history. Many of these individual fires were started by widespread lightning strikes during an intense and prolonged heat wave, a natural force igniting a landscape primed to burn. The sheer size and scope of this fire are almost impossible to truly grasp. It burned over 1 million acres, an area larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. Imagine the immense scale of that devastation. While the number of direct fatalities was thankfully relatively lower compared to the Camp Fire, with one confirmed death, the ecological damage to vast stretches of pristine forest was absolutely immense and will have long-lasting consequences. The fire impacted wildlife populations, destroyed critical habitat, and caused significant air quality problems across a wide region. The estimated cost of fighting this enormous fire alone ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and the overall long-term economic impact is still being calculated. The estimated CO2 emissions from the August Complex Fire are a truly staggering 47.5 million tons. This fire tragically highlights the increasing scale and intensity of wildfires in the West and the immense challenges and resources required to manage and contain them in an era of changing climate. Now, right before the final incident on our list, let's talk about the Dixie Fire, another massive and incredibly destructive California wildfire from the summer of 2021. This fire started in July and burned relentlessly for over 3 months, eventually becoming the second largest single wildfire in California history, scorching nearly 1 million acres of land. Similarly, the devastating Camp Fire, the Dixie Fire, was also traced back to equipment belonging to a power company, again raising serious questions about infrastructure maintenance and safety. The fire tragically destroyed the historic small town of Greenville, a community that had been there for generations, leaving behind scenes of utter devastation and loss. While thankfully there were no direct fatalities reported, thousands of people were forced to evacuate their homes, many for extended periods, and hundreds of homes and other structures were lost to the flames. The financial cost of fighting the Dixie Fire was enormous, stretching resources and manpower to their limits, and the long-term environmental impact on the burned landscape will undoubtedly be felt for many years to come. The estimated CO2 emissions from the Dixie Fire are around 12.5 million tons.
Tonight, a wildfire's wrath, leaving another California town in ash. Greenville, California.
Finally, looking at a very recent event, we need to talk about the Southern California wildfires that occurred in January of 2025. This is a stark reminder that the threat of wildfires in this region is something that can happen even outside of the typical fall fire season. These fires, which started on January the 7th, 2025, were primarily driven by strong Santa Ana winds, which are hot, dry winds that blow from the east and can rapidly spread any spark into a major fire. The blazes primarily affected areas of Los Angeles County, specifically impacting communities in and around the Santa Clarita Valley. Multiple fires broke out, with the most significant being the North Fire near Castaic and the Root Fire in the Gorman area. These fires spread quickly through dry brush and vegetation that hadn't received significant rainfall. The high winds made firefighting efforts incredibly challenging, grounding some aircraft and pushing the flames rapidly. Thousands of residents were forced to evacuate their homes as the fires threatened communities. The North Fire alone burned over 1,700 acres in a very short period of time, leading to mandatory evacuations in several neighborhoods. The Root Fire also prompted significant evacuations and road closures, impacting travel in the area. While the firefighting response was swift and significant, the strong winds made it difficult to get ahead of the flames. Numerous firefighting agencies worked together to battle the blazes on the ground and from the air. As of the latest reports, while the fires are largely contained, they did cause damage to some structures, and the overall cost of fighting these fires and the resulting damage is still being assessed. Thankfully, there have been no reports of fatalities directly caused by these January 2025 wildfires. The cause of these fires is still under investigation. These January fires serve as a critical reminder of the ongoing wildfire danger in Southern California and the importance of vigilance, especially during periods of strong winds and dry conditions. Even in what is typically considered the off-season for wildfires, the risk remains, and these recent events highlight the need for continued prevention efforts and community preparedness. The estimated carbon emissions from these fires is still being calculated, but they add to the growing concern about the impact of wildfires on our atmosphere. And there you have it, the 10 worst wildfires in the history of the USA. If you found this video worth your time, show us your support by hitting that like button and subscribe to our channel for more such amazing videos. Thanks for watching.